you have the opportunity to impact your client's life in all aspects.
The updated weight loss specialization will help trainers in many ways expand their career.
For the first time, we talk about the psychosocial aspects, the sociocultural.
You're going to be able to truly understand what your clients are going through when they have a specific weight loss journey.
All new information, new trends.
We were able to develop what we called personas.
To provide examples of what you might experience as a fitness professional when you encounter a client.
And build confidence as the months go by.
I'll feel more comfortable in my skin.
My self-confidence will improve.
Empathy is something that runs through the weight loss specialization.
It's about guiding people.
Regarding nutrition, regarding exercise.
I can go to bed at night knowing that I've done something good for the world.
It's great content and a blueprint for how to get results with your clients.
We put together a complete solution to help you, the professional, become the next weight loss specialist.
I'm Brad Dieter.
Ken Miller.
Casey DeYoung.
Wendy Batts.
Nolan Highland.
Mike Fanagrassi.
Welcome to NASM's Weight Loss Specialization course.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Random Fit. I'm here with you, with Miss Wendy Batts. Miss Wendy, how are you today?
I am so good. How are you, Ken?
I'm good. Good as always. And like I always say, time with Wendy is time well spent. So I know that
thanks.
always learn something new, despite the research that we wind up talking about, hours on end before we get on these things. But I always love hearing your perspective on how the different topics that we touch on every week, somehow you always have some way of bringing some great practical experience. Not somehow, but you always do anyway. So
I think.
I don't want that to come out wrong. So this week, I am looking forward to hearing what you have to say about blood flow restriction. Let me say that again, blood flow restriction, or BFR as it's called. And I know that you and I have actually done quite a bit of research on this, including going through an online program which helped educate both of us on what blood flow restriction is. And I think with our listeners or viewers, when it comes to this topic, one of the reasons why we picked this is because it's been something that's been in the field of performance and rehab and fitness quite a bit over the last couple of years. And just like going through this course that we went through and doing the research on blood flow restriction, I mean, there's actually quite a bit more to it from a scientific standpoint, but also learning and figuring out when this all started. So a lot of great information on blood flow restriction and the benefits to what it can do for somebody. So I'm ready and excited to talk about this with you, Wendy. So let's talk about this first. With me, my first practical experience with it actually was really favorable towards the gains that I made. And I know that you've had some professional clients, Wendy, professional athletes that have gotten on it. But start us off and share with us what you know about what blood flow restriction is and how it works, and why you've actually used it with your clients.
Yes. Well, so when we're talking about blood flow restriction, we're literally taking cuffs, if you will, and we're placing them in the upper arm. So when you're thinking about where it would be in the upper arm, it would literally be on the area that's your deltoid tuberosity, which is as far up basically that you can get a cuff without being in your armpit. And you actually put these bands on pretty tightly on both arms. Or you could also do your legs, and the sizes of the cuffs, they do kind of matter because there are different widths. So obviously the ones for the arms, the widths are going to be smaller than the width that you would put around your leg. And if you were putting these on your legs, what you're trying to do is is really just take these cuffs and put them around like your upper quad, as high up as you can possibly get them. And there are a ton of different cuffs out there, and there's multiple companies, which we'll talk about, that offer some that are Bluetooth and some that you pump up and you do on your own. But basically, BFR takes an easy workout and turns it into max effort workout, at least from your muscles perspective. And so when you have blood flow restriction, so when you put these cuffs on, you're going to add a little bit of tension to that. It causes changes in the cellular environment that's going to mimic what happens during high intensity exercise. And so when you do that, you're going to have different adaptation changes throughout your muscles. Yeah. And so, when you're thinking, the muscles really don't really know what's happening other than, this blood flow is in the muscles, and it's going to create a metabolic stress. And so when you contract the muscles, but you've got blood flow that's restricted within those muscles, it's going to produce lower oxygen environment to that particular muscle that you're working on and targeting. And so you're going to end up getting like metabolites such as lactic acid and everything that's going to build up in those muscles. And so what that does is then it signals your brain basically like, hey, something's happening here. And so, it's saying like, hey, these muscles are going to need help. And so the brain's going to then initiate the autonomic nervous system. And there's a response, like a hormonal response that happens, and it's going to notably long-term create a growth hormone. And that's going to promote more muscle protein synthesis. So basically it's going to increase size, as well as you're going to end up, like I said, getting this growth hormone production within your muscles. So short and skinny of it basically is that you've got blood flow restriction in your limbs. And when that happens, you're going to be able to get a very high intensity workout by lifting a lighter load. And so there's a lot of really positive ways of looking at this. However, there are some stuff that we're going to talk about that you really want to think about before you have a client or yourself utilize these cuffs. And for my personal experience, when I did it, it was a big wake-up call, because it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. When I had these cuffs and I turned, we're going to talk about what it means when you include, so basically when you start to blow up these cuffs, what it does and what it feels like. Because I found it to be a lot more painful than I thought it was going to be when I was trying to execute certain exercises, whether it was a single joint or multi-joint exercise. It was definitely harder. So I can understand kind of the benefits, but also, the importance of really understanding who is a good candidate for utilizing the cuffs.
Right. And it is one of those things. And thank you for sharing that, I personally, I put it on and I used it, mid last year, just to augment my workouts. And when you follow the rep ranges, which is basically going to be in the higher rep range, because as you cinch up and you occlude blood flow, and again, we're not talking about your arm turning purple or your hands going numb or anything like that. That would be too much. That's not.
That is definitely a side effect. So
that
yes,
is definitely a side effect. So if you only can move your hands like this, all right, then that's a little too much. You gotta lay off some of the pressure. But when you cinch that thing up and you get, let's say last night actually, I was doing push-ups, and so trying to keep with the rep ranges. And again, we'll give you some practical examples of what you can do with it. But I was doing push-ups. I did 30 push-ups, took a minute rest, then I did 15, 15, and 15 repetitions with a minute rest in between. And yeah, that swelling that you feel, that swollenness, that pump, that was definitely there, to where, I mean, it was really hard getting the last 3-4 repetitions, especially in the last 2 sets. And that was the fatigue factor that you talk about setting in, Wendy, to where now it does get uncomfortable, and you're like, I can't believe I'm having trouble doing push-ups. Right? It's not like I have my 70-pound dumbbells or I'm under a heavy bar. I'm just doing body weight push-ups, and because of that blood occlusion, you are, everything that you said, your body's sensing, okay, we're not getting the oxygen we need. We need a little help. Signals going all over the place. to your brain saying, okay, we got to do something about this, because you are definitely working hard right now. You can't even finish a set of 15 push-ups. So we need to get you bigger and we need to get you stronger. And that's what it's telling the muscles that are affected by that occlusion. So, so if it's high up on my arm, just like you said, Wendy, not only is it going to affect, my bis and my tris or everything else below it, but, especially when I was on it for that 30-day period earlier last year, I was noticing some pretty big differences for the amount, when I say for the amount of work that I put forth, and it was basically sub-maximal high repetition. So I was in more of a stabilization or a strength endurance phase of training, and I was still seeing hypertrophic or muscular development, within that phase of training. So it was one of those things you start to say to yourself, like, I can put on muscle, I can put on some size, I can look pretty decent for this amount of work versus doing this amount of work that we usually think about when we're either training ourselves or our clients. So I don't have to beat up my clients to get that size and strength gain if I can use a tool that's going to help augment that. Now, one other thing, when I talked about this to a couple friends of mine, when it's like, so what are you doing? It's one of those things that does sound too good to be true, but again, when you're safe about it and when it's a part of a program, right, you will see gains. Again, you just have to be smart about it. It's not that I'm going to keep putting. I'm going to be this 275-pound guy if all I do is just do BFR, but it's got to be a part of a program, and there's different contexts to which you can use this tool. Again, it's just to help augment your training cycle, if we need a little bit of help or if we need to unload, and because we can't go heavy, we can't go fast and powerful all the time, but if you need a little bit of help, this is something that can get you that 2-5% better with a submax workout.
Well, you bring up some great points, and I think it's important to for anyone that's listening and they really want to learn a lot more about blood flow restriction, I think it's important to take, there's so many different courses out there. There are a ton of podcasts, obviously, and one of the reasons why we're doing it as well, because within the last 3 years, there's been a lot of really positive research showing how great this type of training can be when done correctly. And so just like when we're talking about the NASM OPT model, there's a stair step and there's a way to think about training when doing this, as you mentioned. And, when you're thinking about, like, if you think about 4 pillars, and that's actually a course that I took, and, through Education BFR, they talk about these 4 pillars. And so when you're talking about like pillar 1, you want to think about it in a rehab state. And that is where a lot of the research has shown such a positive factor with utilizing the blood flow restriction cuffs, is because if somebody's coming out of surgery or somebody's not really able to put full body weight on a particular area and they put on the BFR cuffs, then you're really trying to get a muscle that has atrophied due to the surgery or due to not being able to use it based on some kind of injury, to try to get to fire again within its muscles. So basically, cell swelling and deconditioned people, this is a really good way. It's more of an ischemic type conditioning. And so that's pillar 1. So when you're thinking about someone that really hasn't been moving much or someone that can't move, when you utilize this to try to get some kind of activation into that area, that is a huge, huge benefit, because they are starting to get strength and size back into something that they would not have been able to do unless they had, unless they were utilizing the cuffs. Then it's like when somebody progresses to that, you've got to think about, more of a cardio factor. And so that's kind of like a pillar 2. And so basically, again, if you were doing legs and you had the bands on your legs, you're going to try to work yourself up to approximately 20 minutes of doing pretty much just walking or light cycling, where you're not having to really just go into a full-blown sprint, and you're going to get a ton of gains on a cardiovascular standpoint because of the restriction in the muscles itself and what the body has to do to adapt to that. And then, of course, we've got, pillar 3, which talks more about resistance training. And they really do emphasize that if you are going to start utilizing the cuffs, to start with very simple one single joint movement. such as like just a bicep curl or something just very simple before you start doing multi-joint exercises. And as you mentioned, you are doing low repetitions. So one of the big rep schemes, as you had mentioned, was you're doing 30 repetitions in a row at like a 1-2 or so tempo. So you're not going fast, you're not going super slow. You're just trying to get through 30 repetitions. You would take anywhere from like a 30 to a 60-second rest, and then you would do another set for 15 reps, take that amount of rest, and then 15 rest, and then 15. So basically you're doing 4 cycles with different rep ranges to you're totaling approximately 75 reps. Now that's a lot. I mean, that really is a lot. And, a lot of times because of the pressure, I know myself, I was like, man, I'm dying here. Like this is super hard. I don't know if I can do that. And if you can't, that's what they're saying, your ultimate goal is. So shorten your rep ranges or only do 2 sets, 130, 115, and take longer breaks if needed. Or deflate the cuffs, let the blood flow get back into a normal pattern, and then reinflate, and then and then continue on with your workout. That's totally fine. And that's why it's important to listen to your body or listen to your client, because if they can't handle it and your form starts to break down, then it's not a win-win at all. And if anything, you're teaching then improper movement patterns that you want to avoid long term. And then of course they talk about pillar 4, which is more for the higher athlete or somebody that is a higher intensity type individual. And again, when you're occluded or you're using high intensity with BFR, I mean, you're at a really high level, and it's going to be very, very difficult. And so, usually it's an athlete that has prepared their body in a power phase that can handle that type of occlusion with some of the exercises done at that level.
Right. And I know with you, Wendy, especially because you deal with high performing athletes, professional athletes, it is one of those things where, they between, especially when they're in season, right? They have practice, they have travel. So, they're going to be a little fatigued from the whatever quality of sleep you're going to get on the road. And so if they're in town and they're seeing you, and you have your full on facility, you can push them hard. But a lot of times it's like, you're under rested, you're undernourished, and it's going to show in their movement. So that might not be the time to go full on power phase with 5 rep max and then 10 powerful power moves, right? So from that standpoint, it makes it different, because now you can take somebody who you need to back off, right? You need to back off just for their own safety and your own peace of mind, because you're not going to put somebody in harm's way. It's like, well, on the schedule it says we have a strength or a max strength or a power day today, but they come in, they got bags under their eyes, they just got beat the last 2 games of their road series, and now they're there for you. So I can only imagine how useful this is for your professional athletes when they're in season, or they have been pushing it, and it's time to get off the gas pedal a little bit.
Well, and we saw a ton of benefit just recently, because to your point, I had them order them, and they did the arms and the legs. Now, one thing I do want to point out, is very important that you're not using the arms and legs at the same time, that you're only going to do like upper body. I would say upper body one session and then possibly lower body the next session, but you definitely don't want to include both at the same time. Yeah. That is a do not do.
You're gonna have to wake up somebody from their workout.
And I'm not going to be held reliable for that. So I definitely want to make sure that I pinpoint that. But one thing that I think was really good is I had one client, one athlete in particular, that he would go hardcore every single day if you let him. And really he's on the spectrum of, okay, I've got to tell him to stop, or he would just keep going because he feels like he's got to do that to stay at the top of his game. And so, again, that comes from me being a trainer and being honest with him. And so when we received his cuffs, and we did for the first time put him on there, I'm like, okay, this is your 1 rep max. And I know that because we have taken him through the OPT model. We undulate his program, doing stabilization some days, strength some days, power some days. And so on a power day, I'm like, okay, we're going to put these bands on. And then at that point, we're going to do 20% of what your 1 rep max is. And we're going to try to do this repetition, this 30 to 15, 15, 15, and see how you do. And he struggled, and he is a high performance athlete. And it was because it was something completely different than what he had ever done before. However, he saw the importance of decreasing that amount of weight. And so I think it's important that you work with your athletes or your particular clients so they can see, because if they're used to lifting 150-pound, chest press dumbbells, and you're giving them a significantly lower weight, they're like, what's happening here? And they just don't understand until they feel it, and then they understand.
Right.
And so it was important that I worked with him so he got to understand the purpose of it, why we were doing it. And the reason I wanted to do that was because when he had to go off to season, again, they have to go through time where they're not able to be around anyone. Obviously, they were going through and having just to stay in their hotel room for a certain amount of days. And we were able to put those bands on, and he was able to work out, doing a full-blown workout just with his body weight or bands and some of the stuff that he had traveled with, and able to keep his gains. So when other people had to, basically do the same thing, they had to quarantine for 10 to 14 days. They were super tired when they got back onto the court because they weren't able to do some of the stuff he was able to do on the strength side because they didn't have the bands. And so it was actually a huge win for him because he knew how to do it. He understood it. He did the right exercises. We still had a really good program. It was fantastic for his joints because I'm not lifting a huge amount of load, or he's not lifting a huge amount of load on his joints constantly. So it was giving his joints a break while still being able to execute and do what we needed to do for his power output, muscular development, and so on.
Yeah, no, that's awesome work, Wendy. Because good job. As long as, that's the thing, right? As long as they can get back on the court, without missing a beat, because we are in a situation where you don't have access to, to a lot of the things that we're used to having, and especially with, again, the state of the situation here, especially where I am in California, where, there's still a stay-at-home order as of this recording. And so a lot of people don't have access to a squat rack or a bench press or the heavier dumbbells. You're relegated to, as you talked about, the resistance bands or whatever light to moderate weight dumbbells or kettlebells that they might have at home. And so, I mean, one of the biggest things that when I talk to my buddies, it's like, oh, dude, I lost so much weight, or I got under the bar the first time, in a long time, and I lost 50 pounds on my squat. And it's like, well, that's how things are right now. But if you can augment that, and if I only lose 25 pounds off my squat versus 50 pounds off your squat, I mean, that's still, minimizing your losses. And that's one of the things that, you find out is like this one, that, with these tools here, with my air bands, it definitely did its job as far as excel. I mean, I got better results than I had thought for the amount of work that I was putting forth. But conversely, if you can minimize the loss from, missing out on the higher loads or the higher speed work that you might be used to doing, then, that's a plus as well. So if you minimize your losses and maintain your gains, that's basically what any athlete is looking for, right? Or, just even somebody, just as a regular person, right? If I can stay in better shape with the least amount of, that's what I'm about, right? Because I'm just like anybody else. If I don't have to put out that much work, and have almost the same amount of results, I'll take it 24/7, 365.
Yes. And I think it's important to note, though, too, when we keep talking that you're going to get these muscular gains. I mean, if you want to build size, I mean, obviously we need to always think about nutrition is going to play a huge, huge factor in that, as well as you still need to lift heavy. And so we're not saying that if you just use the air bands that you're just going to become, the next bodybuilder and you're going to be this fine-tuned machine. What we're saying is, as you had mentioned, and I just want to stress that again, is
Yeah.
you can bring this into your program to help your joints, to give you a break. But when you are occluded, meaning when you do have your bands blown up, it is important to make sure that you're within a percentage, and we can talk a little bit more, moving forward on what that is and how you find out what's the right percentage for you. But I think it's also important to remember that you have to do both. And so your joints need a break, but when you are under the bands and you're lifting even 20%, I think 20% to me the first time, it was still really heavy. You are doing max effort at a lower intensity. And if that makes sense. So lower intensity, higher rep range, but your muscles itself feel like they're getting maximally worked. And so it is extremely challenging. And I remember the first time I did it on my legs, and I had my left one tight and I had my right one, which I thought was tight. However, when I actually blew up the bands, I felt like my left leg was going to explode in comparison to my right, because apparently I didn't have it quite as tight as the other. So you're going to be able to know what's right. And when you are placing the cuffs, again, you want to think you've got them in the right position. And when you do have it, you want to think that you would be able to put 2 fingers underneath the bands. If you can put anything more than that, you need to make them tighter. If you cannot get 2 fingers underneath the band, then it's too tight. And there are some side effects that can happen when you have your bands on and you actually have them included. And when I say side effects, we're looking for something like you can have minor bruising. And so, what that could tell you is that you may need a wider cuff, or you could use like a sleeve and then place it. But it's important not to have like bulky, you don't want to have bulky shirts on or anything like that. It needs to be truly up against the skin. Or if you're, a female wearing yoga pants, you can have those on, but you don't want to have, baggy shorts on and then put the cuffs there, because you want it to be right up against the skin and as high up as you can in order to really get the maximum, benefits. But, you also have to think that there can be some capillary breaks, and that can mean that you're under occlusion for too long, or there's too much pressure into that area. And at that point, then you just need to reduce the exposure time, or, think through about, your bandwidth. And of course, the big one is numbness. If you've got numbness going on your limbs, then you've got way too much pressure. So you need to deflate and then reevaluate your percentages. And so, Ken, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the percentages and what we mean by that, and when we're saying occlude, like, what do you mean by that?
Well, when you occlude, it just means how much of the blood that you're occluding. So, and here's the thing, reading the different bits of information and the research that's out there, whereas, you look at one article and what it's touting and what it's saying that it does, as far as occluding arterial blood flow, and another one's talking about modifying blood flow to where it's more venous blood flow. But and wherever you're coming from and whatever you're reading, just know that you're really restricting blood coming into the limb and blood coming out from the limb. So when we say arterial, you're as you apply the pressure, you're affecting the blood that's going down into, let's say, into the arm. And I'm pointing at my left arm here. So and I just actually, that's funny, so if this band were strapped around my arm, okay, wrapped around my Bluetooth, my Bluetooth on my phone, it's connected via Bluetooth to my phone, it's going to apply the desired amount of pressure onto my arm. And you'll see here that, we are talking about a pretty good girth as far as the width of the band. So Wendy, this is what you're talking about. You don't want it to be too thin where you're more likely kind of just cinching things down, versus kind of spreading that pressure over, some amount of surface area to where you're going to, decrease the likelihood that you're going to get that bruising that you mentioned. But either way, just know that blood is not free flowing in or out, and that's what's going to create the stimulus for the stress that the brain, the signal that the brain is receiving that, hey, these muscles need to grow. So just to kind of read off of what we're talking about here, your body position is going to be important to know, or it's going to be important to know what you're going to do for the workout, because that's going to affect body position, and body position is going to be need to be considered when you figure out how much pressure you're going to put onto an area. So if you're doing a plank or if you're doing sit-ups or bridges, it's something to where you're on the floor. And then if you plan on having your client standing up, just know that pressure that you're applying to yourself on the floor is going to have a different response or different stress on your blood flow than if you're standing up. So you want to take the most, I guess, the least common denominator when it comes to safety. So when you're supine, 60 to 80%, occlusion seated 50 to 70%, and then the last one standing is 45 to 60%. So here you are, if you're on the floor, you're going to occlude more blood flow. But if you're standing up, that blood flow actually, or that increases. Did I get that right, Wendy, or am I backwards on those numbers? Whenever you throw numbers at me, it takes me a little bit to digest. And here's the thing, because and where I stand on it, or just to share my experience, is that I've only used the arms, versus if I had it around my legs, that's going to be a bigger consideration, just because the mass that your legs have, it's a lot more than what you have on the arms. So just know that you're going to affect greater blood flow. It's going to have more of an effect if you're lying down versus standing up on how much you decide is necessary for you to occlude to get the effects of blood flow restriction. So correct me, Wendy. Did I get that backwards? I think
No, you. I mean, so basically, if you're going to do a floor bridge, and this is what I try to tell people is, whatever is the easiest position, get yourself into. And, Ken and I both, we have our air bands basically through a company that is ran through Bluetooth. And so what that means is basically we have these bands, you press a button, it turns it on, we open up an app, it reads whatever our pulse is. And then at that point, it's going to say, this is, your number. And then at that point, we can adjust it based on what we're doing for the day. So it kind of takes the guesswork out of what our percentages are. But before you can even do anything like that, there's a questionnaire that you have to fill out. And I think that to me is a selling point, because, and we'll talk about what these are, but there are certain specific contraindications that are a red light. You cannot use this if you have these certain things. And then there's some yellow lights, which, like these are some things that you could have, but it seems like based on how you're answering this questionnaire, you would be okay to do it with caution. And like I said, we'll go through some specifics, but I think it's very important to realize that the first time you're going to use this, just choose one exercise and do it and see how your body reacts to it, then decrease it and then finish the rest of your workout. And then at that point, or every time you go back to that exercise or something like that, you can occlude them again, and meaning blow them back up. And because ours is Bluetooth, we just press a button and it's like inflate, deflate, inflate, deflate. It's as simple as that. But whatever you do, you really don't want to be occluded for longer than 30 minutes. So you want to think, that's why it's important. You don't want to leave yourself occluded for an hour workout, because that is like, you really don't want to do that. It's definitely frowned upon. So, if you're going to do upper and lower body, but you just have the legs, like the bands on your legs, then anytime you want to do your leg exercise, if you're doing a vertical load program, so you've got some exercises for upper body, you're doing some core work, and then you're going lower body. Right when you hit the lower body, you want to be in a seated position, knees bent, make sure that, the bands are pulled up right, hit start, it quickly, just immediately will occlude that area. And then you get up and do your leg exercise. And then as you go back to the arms, you're going to deflate them. So therefore, you're not going to have more time under, quote, occlusion than you really should have. And it keeps you within that safety range. I think that's also a very key point. But, as we talk about contraindications, do you want to go through some like no-nos and then some?
Yeah. And this was very eye-opening, because, as you open the box, you're all excited and all you want to do that, and I'm a typical dude. I'll just, awesome. It's got some juice in it. I'm going to use it. I'm going to take it for a test run and do it. But then as you start to read and you study, where you're like, oh my goodness, thank God, thank God I'm a relatively healthy person, because if I had any one of these red lights pop up, like you said, Wendy, it's like, oh man, I could have really done myself some harm. So, so the things that are absolute, this is not the best thing for you today. So when we talk about contraindications, absolutely, this isn't, let's do something else today. Or let's use another toy, another tool to help us get to our goals. But if, one is DVT, or, deep vein thrombosis, watching out for that. Active cancer. Now, let me just also, before we go forward, if there's any doubt on whether or not your client is healthy or is qualified to use this tool, then you want to refer to their physician or do more research and clear your mind first on whether or not this is something safe for your clients to do. So when it comes to cancer, deep vein thrombosis, circulatory issues, having a dialysis port, and I like it. There's quite a few, but just to give you an idea of what to watch out for. Hemophilia, they have an infection. They're fighting an infection. Not good. You want to make sure that that area is able to fight whatever is happening. Their pregnancy. When someone's pregnant, now is not the time to start new things, right? Wait a few months. Yeah, wait a few months. Wait till something else. Wait till your condition
Let the baby
changes.
get out before you start including something and taking blood flow away from certain muscles. Not ideal.
Exactly. And then cerebral infarction. Okay, that's the ischemic heart disease. So these are pretty extreme situations when you just read them off. But you do want to make sure that, okay, I mean, those are contraindications for most other things, unless you talk to the physician. Other areas, contraindications you want to watch out for, somewhere where you have to pause a second and just kind of really do a little bit more research, where they might be able to use it, but under certain circumstances or a modified use, like you said, Wendy. Maybe you inflate it, do a couple, do a set, and then deflate it and let the blood flow in. So there are some opportunities for use. You just want to make sure that you're using it as it relates to that person. So poor circulation, again, infection, again, depending on the degree of the infection. Obesity. I'm sorry, I got my sound studio is a little off.
They're coming after you.
They're coming. Or somebody's, maybe my contraindications, they're coming to help me. Thank goodness for Alameda Fire. Adolescence. So age is a consideration. I mean, and when you look it up, 16-year-olds or younger, you want to, it's not, my kids are, 9 and 8. I'm not going to use this on them. But again, when you talk about programming and program design, somebody at that age, until you get body control first, these are the things you want to look at. Do they have flexibility, body control, coordination, postural endurance, before you start to augment their workout with other tools. Hypertension, again, if you've been diagnosed as having high blood pressure, again, go to their physician, let them know. And I've done that, to where I just, hey, I'll send them a link. This is what I plan on doing. Ask your doctor if this is something that you could or should or we can consider as part of your conditioning plan. Because if someone has hypertension, a lot of times I've been referred clients because their body weight, their deconditioning, and that's what's contributing to their high blood pressure. So if we can augment their workouts and get them conditioned, better shape, help them lose weight faster, then this might actually help them with that condition. Varicose veins, again, just something to consider. I know there's more than a few of my clients that have raised varicose veins. So this, may be okay for the upper body, maybe not okay for the lower body. So some things to consider, when looking at. So when you're doing your client intake, your health history, medical history, you want to take note that even though they've been with you for a while, take that information from your first session, and it's not a bad idea either to update your health and medical history with some clients, especially if you're one of those long-time trainers who's had a client for 5-10 years. Sometimes things change physically, and maybe they weren't the spring chicken they were when they first started training with you, but to just account for where they are today, and to make sure we don't put them in harm's way, especially when using anything new like this, especially because we are dealing with blood flow restriction.
And as you mentioned, I know starting with the poor circulation, that's kind of the yellow light all the way on. And to your point about adolescence, the reasons that's on the yellow light, used with precaution, was mainly because there's just not a lot of research out there, and they haven't done research on the younger folks, if you will. And so they're not saying that long term. I mean, this has kind of really been a booming thing, and there's been a ton of research out there just within the last 3 years, but there's still so much research that needs to be done. And to your point, taking that intake form and literally having them sit down before they utilize this particular modality or this tool is extremely important. And I obviously am going to tell you, you really want to have some education before you use these, because I know myself, I didn't know a lot of this stuff, and I went ahead and used them because when I received them in the box, there wasn't a ton of information of don't do, and because there are so many different companies out there that are now kind of getting into, the blood flow restriction space, there may be some information that comes with yours or may not. And once I went through the app, I saw that intake form on there, and it will, like I said, it would stop me if I hit yes or no and asking for, some to be cleared or whatever on the doctor form. And that's extremely important. But, within a lot of companies too, if you go onto their website or you take some of their education, they will provide you with some of these forms as well. So if you're going to do this and you don't have a trainer and you want to try to get in to check this out because you're finding it to be very interesting and you want to see if it's the right choice for you, ask your doctor if they think it's a good choice. Look at that form and make sure you feel that you're very comfortable of understanding the purpose and that you have a specific process, because, you don't want to occlude something and then obviously have some side effects because you just weren't sure if you were the right candidate.
Right. And, you hit a lot of points there. And the thing about it is, with the education as it's coming out, I mean, Wendy, since you and I first started talking about this, I think there's been 2 webinars and a new certification course that has come out just on blood flow restriction. And it has come, to the point within the performance side of things, because again, if you're a high-end athlete, getting that 1 or 2% better is going to make a difference in how you play a game. But one of the webinars that I attended, most of the attendees were physical therapists or are physical therapists, and they're just looking at, okay, how can I use this responsibly with my patients? So that's relating to that pillar number 1 that you're referring to, Wendy. So that's where it's had its application a lot, as it's come up through the last few decades. But a lot of people don't realize that blood flow restriction, or blood flow modification, as it's also called in different formats, has been around for, since the 70s. I mean, initially discovered by Yoshiaki Sato back in the mid 1960s for how he felt after sitting down for a long time and realized that he had stopped his blood flow to his lower leg and it felt tight, like he had a pump in there. And then kind of going from that practical experience, that one experience, now he started to apply the techniques and started looking at research and did some studies and coordinated with researchers on how it's, and how it affects the body. And he's got his own technique. He's got his own course out there. He's got his own blood flow modification tools, which can be used on dry land as well as in the water. So, as you mentioned, Wendy, there's a lot of blood flow restriction tools out there, and Katsu is one of the big ones that's out there internationally around the world. And again, a lot of its application has been in the field of rehab, and it's starting to bleed its way into other areas. And you shared quite a bit as far as how your professional players have used it to help them, just maintain themselves. So, which is overall why we're doing this podcast today on the subject, because it is out there. We are seeing it more and more casually, or it's coming up on your social media feed. And if you want more information, you and I, Wendy, we both recommend that you do get education, learn more about it, learn what it's doing to you physically before we start, slapping it on this client, putting on that client. Oh, you want to put on muscle? Boom. You want to put on, so you want to get some strength gains? Oh, you're coming back from ACL surgery? There you go. Okay. Who else wants it? Come on. Let's go. Let's just start putting it on.
You mean that's not how you run your business?
Oh. Yeah, exactly. Well, if I owned a BFR equipment company, that might be, but
right.
But I guess as a fitness professional, as a strength coach, as a personal trainer who works with corrective exercise, get more information before use it on yourself first before you start putting it on your clients. But, get some information, learn what it is, because we can only cover so much in this time that we have together on this podcast. But we're not here to teach you how to use it. We're just here to share kind of, well, what, why are we seeing this more now than we did a year ago?
Absolutely. And you make some very valid points. And I think that's also important too, just to mention that you've got to find the right cuffs for you. I personally, again, went the Bluetooth route because I wanted to take the guesswork out. I wanted to make sure that if my clients used it, that they had the same app. There was some, there was a certain guideline that they followed that I personally felt comfortable with utilizing with my clients as well as myself. But there are a ton of different, bands and different companies and stuff out there. So you want to do the research to find out, because if they don't include on their own and you're not running it through an app, you've got to be very comfortable with, figuring out the right percentage. And you can do that by pulse pressure sensors. You can use an external Doppler, that looks at the radial artery. There's also the pulse oximeter. Did I say that right? I always say that.
You're good.
And but there's different, there's different ways that you have to know how to utilize some external pieces of equipment in order to make sure that when you're under occlusion that you're at the right percentage. So I know that, as you just said, we could talk about this forever. I was fascinated with the research that I read and seeing how much current research is out there and how everyone, it's not like they're jumping on the bandwagon. They're just seeing the benefits that really could be crucial in their business, especially in the rehab side, but then also some of the gains, such as myself, that I have with different clientele. And, I'm really excited that we talked about this, because I think we're going to keep hearing more and more about it as we move forward.
Without a doubt. And who knows, maybe we do another podcast on it. I don't know.
Who knows?
We'll find out something new and exciting about its use and application.
Yes.
But I think that's about it. When that's enough. I feel like I've just been drinking out of a fire hose. Speaking of which, it's this Alameda Fire just doing their job. But thanks, Wendy, for your time and sharing your experience. I always learn, actually more than I plan on learning on these webcasts. But hey, for you listeners and watchers out there, if you like what you're hearing and you want to hear more from us, like, follow, subscribe, download, and we hope to deliver the information that you're looking for. So please email. Our social and our contact information is kind of flashed up on the screen, a couple times throughout this podcast. But we really appreciate you spending your time with us, and I know that with a lot of choices for this type of information, we appreciate you coming to us for this. So on behalf of Wendy and I and Random Fit, thank you guys so much for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you soon. So take care, everybody, and be well.